Okay, hello everybody. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our volunteer recognition event. This is an event where we just want to take some time to thank our volunteers who have had to help us all out over during some really difficult circumstances for all of us. We have a couple of library staff members who are going to speak of their appreciation.
Sorry about that. Looks like a little bit of technical difficulties, but I believe that Marcel was just saying that we're going to say a few words of thanks to our wonderful volunteers. And then we have author Mark Leslie, who's going to be joining us. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. At the library, we really appreciate all of the efforts of our volunteers. You make a huge difference in the lives of our members every day. We are currently in uncertain times, and for this reason, some of our volunteer activities are on hold, while others have moved online. We appreciate the patience, flexibility, and dedication of all of our volunteers, and we very much look forward to seeing each of you again in person when we're able to. In recognition of all your contributions, we wanted to hold a special event this evening. We're pleased to welcome author Mark Leslie, author of Haunted Hamilton. Mark will be joining us in just a few minutes after we hear a few words from our Newcomer Learning Center staff. And on behalf of the Extension Services team, I wanted to give a heartfelt thank you to all of you who volunteer for visiting library services and assist some of our most vulnerable customers connecting to library materials. We look forward to connecting with you again in the near future. So Nona is going to be up next, and she's one of our ELS supervisors in the Newcomer Learning Center, and I'm pleased to welcome her to the digital stage now.
Hi everyone, my name is Nona, and I'm one of the English language learner supervisors at the Newcomer Learning Center. I, along with my colleagues Ning and Kendra, want to express our gratitude for the dedication, perseverance, and resilience of our volunteer tutors. As we all know, COVID-19 has had the effect of turning everyone's life upside down. Everything that was once normal and usual has become abnormal and confusing. Through this experience, our volunteers have continued to demonstrate a tremendous degree of compassion, understanding, flexibility, and generosity. They have literally been a beacon in stormy weather, and their adaptability in the face of adversity is nothing short of astounding. Whether the need of their learner requires continuation of studying online, a regular phone call to check in and see how things were going, or the need to suspend tutoring temporarily with the plan to resume once life returned to a more manageable state, what has become increasingly clear is how much our volunteers are the glue of the tutoring program. Without their support, we would not have the opportunity to provide learning to over 100 students. Without their support, numerous newcomers may not reach their language goals. Without their support, many would feel isolated and alone and have difficulty navigating not only a new culture, but the new world reality in which we find ourselves. The Newcomer Learning Center volunteers work tirelessly and quietly behind the scenes to support the needs of their students. Last year, this equated to over 7,700 hours of service. And though COVID has changed the trajectory of this number for this year, the relationship between the students and tutors have not changed. The student-tutor relationships continue to demonstrate that human interaction, language learning, and connection to community remain the strength of the program. Our volunteer contributions to the program can not only be measured in hours of input, it has to be measured in compassion and understanding, and more importantly, the quality of their interaction. As a staff of 3, in the best of times, we couldn't provide the quality of support that our volunteers provide. And in today's times, of course, that is even more abundantly clear that we need our volunteers. Students are constantly telling us about their appreciation for the program, which means they are writing with appreciation for you, our volunteers. They speak of the support, encouragement, assistance that you provide. They speak of stability and the feeling of their tutor helping them to grow in confidence in themselves. These are intangibles, but have a tremendous impact on lives lived. Make no mistake, the ripple effect of your volunteerism is huge. Please don't ever underestimate that power. It's truly breathtaking. From the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank you, our volunteers, for what you are doing every day. Thank you for adapting to this changing world, following the needs of your student, and the advice of public health. thank you for making a difference in your students' lives, and thank you for giving your time and energy to support others. All of us at the Newcomer Learning Center look forward to the time when we can physically see you all again and connect in a more personal way. We will continue to follow the advice of public health regarding the reopening of services, because we want to ensure that when you return to face-to-face interactions, it is safe to do so. We will continue to keep you informed. In the meantime, stay healthy and well.
Thanks, Nona. And thanks
Thank
again
you.
to all of our volunteers. We're excited to introduce Mark Leslie, who's going to be doing a book talk and answering some questions. You can type questions into the chat as we go along, and we'll do them after his talk. So Mark Leslie is a writer, bookseller, and all-around book nerd. He writes Twilight Zone style fiction and nonfiction, true ghost story books that include Haunted Hamilton, Spooky Sudbury, and Creepy Capital. A longtime resident of Hamilton, Mark now calls Waterloo home and can regularly be found haunting bookstores, libraries, and craft breweries. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Erica. It is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be here, especially on a night that is acknowledging the many fine volunteers from the Hamilton Public Library. I truly appreciate all of the great things that you guys do for the community, and I'm honored to be a part of this event. Alex, I think you were going to pop up the slides because I actually have some visuals, so you don't have to look at me and my friend Barnaby. Thank you. I can see the slides there perfectly. I'm hoping everyone else can see the slides fine. And I'm just what I'm gonna do tonight is I'm gonna give you a bit of my backstory. I'm going to go into, you can go to the next slide again, thank you. I'm gonna do a brief origin of the book Haunted Hamilton, as well as some of the other similar titles that are in there. And you can tell I didn't proofread, I got a little small lowercase k on book there instead of title. I'm gonna explain Barnaby Bones, who's beside me, and had I been at an event in the library, Barnaby would have been with me. And then we're going to share some, talk about some historic haunted Hamilton stories, and then Q&A. So why don't we start off with a bit of the backstory? If we can go to the next slide, please. A lot of people will ask me, why do you write scary stories? My mom used to say it all the time. Why do you choose to write these kinds of stories when you should be writing a nice romance novel? And next slide, please. I think the reason that I write scary stories is that's me. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. This is Niagara Falls. This is at the House of Frankenstein Wax Museum. And I was so terrified for Frankenstein. And I can still remember his fingers on my throat. I know it was an actor in a costume, but I was still terrified because I am the biggest chicken you will ever meet. I am terrified of the boogeyman still, and I'm 51 years old. If you go to the next slide, please. I'm actually afraid of the monster under my bed. Now, I have a 15-year-old now, but when he was a child growing up, I was terrified that he was going to talk about the monster under the bed or the one in his closet because I couldn't lie to him and say that they're not real. So I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of all of these creepy things. You know, I never leave my hand hanging over the edge of the bed. I never leave my leg hanging over the edge of the bed for fear that something might come out and get me. Now, the good news is I actually have for more than 12 years now have had a bed that actually is just box spring that goes right to the floor. So there's no monsters that can hide under my bed anymore. So I've magically prevented that. And speaking of magic, the covers are magic and they will protect you from the ghosts and goblins that crawl around in the dark. But I've always been drawn to the dark. I've always been drawn to the unknown and the things that are fearful from the dark. If we can go to the next slide, please. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal. These are some of the books that I actually still have to this day. And these are books that I picked up and started reading when I was young and still have as reference material. As a matter of fact, I'm in my home office in Waterloo, and the stand-up desk in front of me is built into bookshelves because I love to be surrounded by books. That is the most wonderful place in the world. I think it was Cicero that said that a room without books is like a body without a soul. And so all of the books in front of me are what I call research books, or books of true or tales told as true, ghost stories and unexplainable phenomenon like UFOs and Sasquatch and things like that. These ones I first discovered, if we can go to the next slide, please, first discovered, as many people do, I fell in love with books and with reading at Levack Public Library. Now, that was my very first experience because it was magic. I could go as a child every Saturday with my mom to Levack Public Library, and I could bring books home and read them and then go back the next week and get other books. It was this phenomenal place. Now, Levack, Ontario is about a 45-minute drive northwest of Sudbury, Ontario. Sudbury, population 90,000, was the big city for this small town country bumpkin. So Levack and Dowling and Onaping at the time had about 6,000 people as residents. It was a relatively small community. We did not have a bookstore. We had to drive 45 minutes into Sudbury to get to one of those. We had a library, we had a mini mart, we had a dairy, and a hardware store. And there were very few things to do. So I even remember when the library would close down for a few weeks, I was terrified that I would not have things to read. So I would go and get as many books as they would allow me to get out for those. It was probably only 2 weeks that they were shut down for, but it felt like forever when I was that age. Mr. Roberts was our librarian. You can see a picture of him on the top left. I dedicated my book of Haunted Bookstores and Libraries to him. And the thing I remember most about the library were the people who worked there and how impassioned they were for reading and helping people discover things that they loved. I grew up to become a bookseller, and I believe a lot of that love and passion that I took into my job came from these folks. And there was a nice lady, and I can't remember her name, but she worked at the library, and she knew I liked spooky books. And I remember I would go in, I'd try to get into the library at least once a week after school because it was connected to the Levack Public School. And I remember she would always put books aside for me and say, "Oh, Mark, there's a new book on Sasquatch. We think you would love it." I put it aside because I knew you would want to be one of the first people to check it out. And that passion and understanding of the weird, creepy things that I love to read was phenomenal. And I will always, always acknowledge and thank librarians who make this, who are part of the community and serve the community, which is another reason why I'm so happy to be here chatting, on Volunteer Recognition Night. So go to the next slide, please. I also, things that happened to us when we were kids kind of stick with us. So I'm just going, what do you think about this? What is the most frightening movie scene that you remember from your childhood? And right now you're probably flashing back to some stuff. If you want to share that in the Q&A afterward, that would be fun. But if you go to the next slide, I'm going to tell you, one of the ones was a movie I was too young to watch when it came out, but it was on television. I probably got up to go to the washroom, and as a mischievous child, I snuck my head around the corner to see what my parents were watching on TV. And I saw the scene with George C. Scott with the ball coming down the stairs. I think I snuck out again. I had to go there because I was just fascinated by this really creepy story. And there was this scene where he's walking up the stairs and there's this white door. And I remember having nightmares for years about approaching this door and wondering what was behind the door. Well, what was behind the door was that old wheelchair, as you can see from the movie. I don't even think I've watched this movie as an adult because it terrified me so much. But those are the kinds of things that stuck with me, those images. And a lot of the things that scared me about a movie like this was the unknown, the unexplained. And that continued to feed my desire to want to tell stories. Now, if we go to the next slide, the next question I kind of want to ask you is there a class from elementary school that you struggled with and just never got? I was never particularly good at math, so I really had to work hard at math. But one of the things I really could not understand and got frustrated with was history. Because my point of view of history, which is the point of view of a lot of younger folks, was why are we bothering to talk about stuff that happened before? Now, I think we know as adults the value and importance of recognizing and understanding history, particularly because we have such a rich history and so many things to learn from. But if we go to the next slide, it wasn't until I was an adult and I was visiting Ottawa. And I'd lived in Ottawa. I went to university there, but I was returning to visit Ottawa, and I went on the ghost walks in Ottawa, and they're dressed up in this Victorian costumes, and they have these beautiful old lanterns, and they stay in character, and they take you on a walk through downtown Ottawa, but they share the history, because you cannot tell a good ghost story without understanding the history. And for the first time in my life, I understood the richness and value of history, of all of the people who lived here before us, of all of the things that happened, the lives lived, the tragedies that happened, just from that one ghost walk. And then I began to appreciate history, because you can't tell a good ghost story without getting into history. So if we go to the next slide, please. When I moved to Hamilton, my love for Hamilton, I moved to Hamilton in 1997 to open up the chapters in Ancaster. I was living in Ottawa, and was moving to open that big bookstore up, because I love books, and I was working in the book industry since 1992. And one of the ways for me to get to know the city, this was a city that my wife was, she had grown up in Hamilton, so she knew it really, really well, but I was a foreigner. I'd lived in Sudbury, I'd lived in Ottawa. So next slide, please. That's when I discovered, at the time, there was one group in town. It was called Haunted Hamilton. And Haunted Hamilton was an amazing celebration of the historic and creepy elements of our wonderful city of Hamilton. There are now two groups. There's a group called Haunted Hamilton, and there's a group called Ghost Walks, and they both do very complementary things. They cover different areas of the city, and they both really give you an amazing opportunity. I strongly encourage, if you are interested in learning more about the history of Hamilton in a really fascinating way, when COVID-19 is over and group gatherings are available again, I strongly encourage you to check out these ghost walks. Just absolutely fascinating. But what had happened is I was working, I came to Hamilton, I went on the ghost walks, and I remember talking to Daniel and Stephanie, who are the co-owners. They each run, Daniel runs Ghost Walks and Stephanie runs Haunted Hamilton now. And I remember talking to them and saying, you guys have some amazing stories. I really think this needs to be in a book, because as a writer, that's how I think. And I remember them saying, we're just too busy running our business to do it. But tell you what, we'll give you access to all of our research and files, because we love history and we love Hamilton and we love this. This is that's their life. That's what they live and breathe. And so they gave me access to it. And I pitched the book to Dundurn. They ended up actually writing the introduction for the book, Haunted Hamilton, very impassioned introductions about the history. And I'm just going to give you a bit of a background onto how this happened, just in case anyone's interested in the mechanics of being a writer. So if you can go to the next slide, please. The first question is how long does it take to write a book? I remember seeing Farley Mowat at Laurentian University in Sudbury when I was young. And I remember him saying, any book that takes less than 4 years to write is not a real book, which is really disappointing, because I discovered Piers Anthony, fantasy author at Levack Public Library. And I remember Piers Anthony was writing 3 or 4 books a year. So I thought, oh no, my favorite writer isn't a real writer, according to Farley Mowat. And technically, what I often say is, well, it takes me about 5 days to write a book. And here's why. It's because I'm a serial procrastinator. It may actually take a year of research, or even 2 or 3 years of research, such as one of the books I've been working on now for several years on haunted bars and breweries. But the research for that is really, really fun. So I don't think that research is ever going to go away. But what usually happens is, when I have a contract to turn in a book with a publisher, I work on research, I gather my files, I talk about it, I do all kinds of stuff. I keep file folders filled with information. I go to the library. I usually meet with the local librarians and get lots of great resources. And Hamilton Public Library, the Central Branch, was amazing for that. Margaret Houghton was crucial in helping me get access to all kinds of files that are on file at the library, which was amazing. And so I always refer to that. But usually the actual writing, where I'm actually butt in chair, fingers on keyboard, is usually the very last week that it's due. What I will sometimes do is take a day off of work on Friday or on Monday. And what I do with that is I work 8 to 12 to 14 hours and do nothing but write. I'll do 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 words in a day if I can, just to get that turned in. But that's because I'm a procrastinator. So it usually takes about typically 6 months to a year for the whole research. But the actual mechanics of writing is just a few days. So with the next slide, please. With Haunted Hamilton, which was published in 2012, I had been at a meeting with the folks from Dundurn, and you may recognize Dundurn Publishing as Canada's largest independent publisher. They're based out of Toronto. But Kirk, the original owner, he just recently sold that 40 plus years after starting this publishing company. He loved Hamilton and loved Dundurn Castle. Therefore, he named the publishing company after that, which you can even see the image of Dundurn is in their logo. But I remember hearing at a meeting one of the vice presidents of Dundurn saying, "We've always wanted to write to publish a book of ghost stories about Hamilton." So I put the little writer in me put that in the back of his head. And then I realized that Daniel and Stephanie had all of these amazing stories. So I approached them again and said, "Listen, they're looking for a book on that. Would you guys want to work on one together?" They said, "No, we're too busy, but we'll write the introduction for you." So I did a single page book proposal. And what I did, just so you can understand how books work, is books are a business as much as we're impassioned about the stories we want to tell. I kind of had to prove that there was a market for it. Well, Hamilton's population was X, and there's a ghost walk company doing regular, steady business. People love ghost stories. People love local history. So this book was for people who love ghost stories. It was also for people who love local history, but it was also for people who loved and were passionate about their city. It's almost like a Venn diagram. And so they came back to me and said, "Oh my God, this sounds great. Could you send us the manuscript? We'll put it in the fall catalog," which usually doesn't happen. It usually takes a while. Usually it could be 2 years after acceptance that a book gets published. So I got the contract in the mail, and then I started to write the book. And what I did for that one was I took a full week off work, and that's how Haunted Hamilton was written. That kind of led to, next slide, please. I was being interviewed from my hometown of Sudbury, where I'd grown up, or Levack, which is just outside of Sudbury. And the journalist was interviewing me. And because it was an article for the Northern Life, which is a Sudbury newspaper, she said, "Have you ever thought about doing a book of ghost stories about Sudbury?" And I said, "No, I'd never thought about that." And she said, "Well, I've written some articles about local hauntings for the newspaper. If you ever want to co-author a book, just let me know." So next time I was up in Sudbury, because I'm still there regularly, my mom still lives up in Levack, we sat down at a Tim Hortons. And again, I looked at the demographics. There's a lot of ghost stories from Sudbury. This is the population. This will be good for people who love their city. This will be people who love history, even mining history and stuff like that. There's a lot of richness there. And just ironically, Sudbury is probably the smallest demographic city of any of the books I've published with Dundurn. And to this day, it is still my #1 best-selling title with them. That's just how passionate people from that area are. If you can move to the next slide, please. I then got to write the passion project that I was waiting my entire life to write. Tomes of Terror was a book of haunted bookstores and libraries, because I think they're the best places in the absolute universe. As you can see, I've got books behind me. They're all around me. They've always been around me. And so I combined my love of ghost stories and history with books. Now, again, there was no other book on the market like this. And to this day, there's no other book of haunted bookstores and libraries on the market. And I did the research, so it was 30% Canadian, 30% US, and 30% rest of world. Interesting factoid about, pardon me, about this book. I actually completely lost what the interesting factoid about this book was, but I'll get to it. I think I since encountered locations since writing the book that I actually got a chance to go to, and I will share one about Waterdown Library, for example, which I didn't talk about in Haunted Hamilton, but I did write about in Tomes of Terror, and that was their original location, not where they recently moved to. So the next book, actually before the next slide, this is where Barnaby Bones, who accompanies me when I do book signings. Now, the reason I have Barnaby is my mascot, because I write scary stories. So whether I'm at a library or at a bookstore, having this skeleton with me tells people two things. It tells them if they're interested in creepy, macabre, scary things, they will be attracted to come over and see what's going on. If they are not, they will know to stay away from the crazy man with the skeleton. And so it kind of serves that purpose. If I'm sitting at a bookstore or sitting at a library or whatever, it kind of lets people know what they're in for. So it's an author brand thing that works really, really, really well. What I did when I released Haunted Tomes of Terror is I had done book events at Hamilton Public Library. I'd also done book events at various independent bookstores, in Hamilton and in Ottawa. And what I did is I had some special shirts made up with the cover of the book on the front, which Barnaby is wearing, but I'm also wearing the shirt. And I think this was taken at the Upper James location, Terryberry location, where I was doing a talk. And so beneath my jacket, I had that. And on the back, it says, "I love to haunt Hamilton Public Library," and then it asks, "What's your favorite bookish haunt?" And so I made some for haunted Hamilton Public Library. I did give them away to people who were just huge rabid fans of HPL as well as of the book, and also did that for some of the independent bookstores. I love to haunt epic books in Hamilton, and I put their URL. So I had done that as well, which I thought was an interesting little twist. But there's Barnaby with me. Barnaby's also good for icebreakers. A lot of people will ask, because he normally is in my car with me. He sits in the front. Actually, I have multiple Barnabys. This Barnaby has broken legs, so he just hangs on the wall here. I can't take him out anymore. He's kind of beyond repair. I have another Barnaby, actually two of them in the car. Well, another one has broken legs, so I just got an additional one. And I would normally just have them in the car rather than taking them in and out of the house all the time to do book events. Now, obviously, I haven't done book events for months, but he's still in the car because it's part of my brand. But when people see Barnaby, they will sometimes come up and ask questions. Now, in the car, it's often about the HOV lanes. And I was pulled over by a ride program in Parry Sound, Ontario at 1 a.m. on my way up to Sudbury one time, with Barnaby strapped in the front seat. That was an interesting occasion where the police officer asked if either one of us had anything to drink. And I said, "No, I'm driving. I've had nothing but coffee. And as for my friend here, alcohol goes right through him." At which point I wasn't sure. He did laugh, fortunately. But it was an eerie experience for him. I did give him a copy of my book to say, "Well, this is why I have the skeleton with me, officer." So people will come up and joke and say, "Your buddy looks like he could use a meal," or something like that. And that's a really, really good icebreaker, because it just gives us something to talk about. Next slide, please. I then moved on to write about Ottawa, a creepy capital. Again, there had been only one book before published on that topic, and my partner Liz and I returned to Ottawa, and it was great to explore the city with her. And Creepy Capital came out, which was again a fun one, because I called Ottawa home for so long. It was really fun to return and explore. And then next slide, please. Haunted hospitals happened when a fellow author leaned over to me at a conference we were sitting at together in Calgary, Alberta, called When Words Collide. And she said, "I live near a haunted hospital," which started a 3-hour conversation of talking about haunted hospitals. Next day, we met for lunch. We talked about it, came up with a proposal, pitched the book to Dundurn. And that's coming close to Spooky Sudbury in terms of its sales. Again, it's 30% Canadian, 30% US, 30% rest of the world. I got to return to Hamilton for this one because I got to write about Century Manor, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, because I did not have a chapter on Century Manor. And it actually was thanks to an event at Hamilton Public Library that I got the story for Century Manor, because somebody in attendance shared a story with me afterwards, which was cool. So next slide, please. The last book I did with Dundurn, which came out in 2018, was Macabre Montreal. My co-author, Shana Krishnasamy, we worked together. I worked at Kobo for 6 years, and she worked for me there. And she lived in Montreal and said, "Why don't we do a book of ghost stories of Montreal?" Again, there had never been one. And we did that one co-promoting with the local Ghost Walk group. So they wrote the introduction for us. We recommend them highly in the book, and they actually recommend our book to people who've gone on the tours and want to have some way to take Montreal home with them. And Shana took that photograph on the cover from one of the beautiful cemeteries that they have on Mount Royal there. So that's the next slide, please. I am working right now on Demonic Dolls, Screaming Skulls, and Other Haunted Objects, which should be coming out in October if everything goes well. And it's going to be inanimate objects, of which there are a lot of haunted books that I've already researched, which is kind of cool. And I live in Waterloo now, so I thought I should do a book about weird Waterloo. And it's not just going to be ghostly and unexplainable things, but it's also going to be weird stuff like weird laws. You know how there's laws where you can't tie your horse to a bucket within 50 feet of a snake, or some weird bylaws that have happened in history. Because I always thought that's kind of interesting to see why is there a law? My partner Liz often says that The reason they have a sign, when you see in Starbucks, it says no standing on the table while, reciting the alphabet with the hiccups. The reason they have a sign like that is because somebody did something they shouldn't have. Now they have to make a sign, or that's usually why they have to have a law. So that's the next one. Next slide, please. This is just a cheeky slide showing Barnaby Bones and all of his guises. So when I got authors' copies of Tomes of Terror, Barnaby went to sit with Santa, in which case he was in a card. He is often active on Canada Day, reading some of my books, and you see him at a Comic-Con. I think that was Hamilton Comic-Con where you see Barnaby. That slide was just there so I could take a quick drink. Now, if we go to the next slide, please, I'm going to get into some of the stories about our beautiful and awesome city. So the first one, next slide, please, is the Customs House. Now, the Dark Lady, and this is actually, and I'm going to read briefly from a poem from Alexander Hamilton Wingfield, but it was based on an encounter with the Dark Lady, the most famous ghost of Hamilton, from the Customs House. Now, the Customs House was built in 1858, between 1858 and finished in 1860. It was made with Italian architecture, just a gorgeous, gorgeous building. It's one of the oldest remaining federal buildings in all of Canada. The thing that fascinated me most, because again, when I write about the city, I get to learn so much about the buildings, is how many different things this building was. So it was the Customs House originally. It was a YWCA in 1893. It was owned by the Associated Charities of Hamilton in 1908. It was then owned by the Empire Wool Stock Company. And there was a huge fire that destroyed most of the upper floor that had to be rebuilt. Just lots of damage. And that was in 1920, which was terrifying. The Empire Wool Stock Company ended up closing in 1950. But one of the things I found fascinating about that building was during the Empire Wool Stock Company's heydays, Hamilton could have been known as a textile city as much as it was a steel town, because that's how popular that was. I neglected to say that the Customs House was built for processing of goods in and out of the city. And that's why it was originally built. It did, in 1956, the Naples Macaroni Company was there until they were actually shut down for some health issues. And then the building was shut down in 1979, and it remained vacant until the Ontario Workers and Heritage Centre sort of brought it back in 1995. And if you've ever had a chance to attend any of the events there, it is an absolute beautiful historic building, well worth visiting. But when you're visiting, be careful, because of the Dark Lady. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. The Dark Lady was believed to be a young English woman who had come on a boat overseas. She was pregnant and was sent to the New World. And she ended up having an affair with the ship's captain on the way over. And she was very needy. He was obviously just looking for a quick fling. They got into some scuffles when they got back because she didn't want to let him go. He ended up killing her, and the story is that he ended up dragging her body and locking it behind a basement wall, at which point there have been weird sightings of this Dark Lady wandering through the stairs, through the lower levels as well, and even the pounding that you would sometimes hear on the wall. Stephanie, who is the owner of Haunted Hamilton, recounts going to visiting the Customs House with her father when she was young and thinking she saw something weird. As an adult, she was there to do an event for Haunted Hamilton, and she described sitting in this chair, and there's a chair that had like old pieces of wax that, how they stick to it. And she described looking down and concentrating on trying to get the wax off of the arm of the chair, and feeling something watching her, looking up and seeing the Dark Lady standing there. At which point she just froze because she knew there was something odd, because she could see through the woman, and then the woman disappeared. Now, I'm just going to read, because I think this is kind of a fascinating poem. This is a poem that was written in 1873, and Alexander Hamilton Wingfield was an employee at the Customs House. And back in the day, there was legends of the woman in black who was often seen. And this is the woman in black. The ghosts long ago used to dress in pure white. Now they've got on a different track. For the Hamilton ghost seems to take a delight to stroll round the city in black. Pat Duffy, who saw her in Corktown last night, has been heard today telling his friend that she stood 7 feet and 9 inches in height and wore a large Grecian band. A peeler, now a peeler is a term for a police officer based on Sir Robert Peel. That's where Bobby comes from, as well as Peeler. A little bit of historic fact on where those police officer nicknames come from. A peeler who met her turned blue with affright, and in terror he clung to a post. His hair, once a carroty red, has turned white since the moment he looked on the ghost. Her appearance was frightful to gaze on, he said. It filled him with horror complete, for she looked unlike anything living or dead that ever he'd seen on his beat. Her breath seemed as hot as a furnace. Besides, it smelt strongly of sulphur and gin. 2 horns, a yard long, struck straight out of her head, and her hoofs made great clatter and din. Her air was majestic and terribly grand as she passed muffled up in her veil. A bottle of ruin she held in each hand, and she uttered a low, plaintive wail. There is rest for the weary, but no rest for me. I cannot find rest if I try. 3 months and 3 days I have been on the spree. Mr. Mueller, how's that for high? I have mixed in the world both with spirits and men. Once more with the spirits I'll go. She stopped, took a sniff of the ruin, and then she popped into the cellar below. He could hear her again crying out from her den, "Tonight you will see me no more, but I'll meet with you Saturday evening at 10 by the fountain that stands in the gore." Some people that passed there this morning at 2 found the peeler still glued to his post. He told them this yarn I've been telling you. That's the last news from the ghost. What I love about this poem is so many references to different places in Hamilton as well. And obviously there's a lot of exaggeration because none of the stories I heard had described her with horns, but that's obviously the stuff of imagination, which was kind of a fun tale. If you can go to the next slide, please. The next location is the Waterdown Ghost, and the Waterdown Ghost, was at the original library building, which was I lost my notes on when it was built, but it was a historic building. It's since moved, but there were issues with the elevators here, and one of the issues with the elevators was the elevators would go up and down on their own. The doors would open, they would close. It's just 2 stories, very, very slow elevator as well, or 3 stories, I should say. There's the basement and then the upper floor. And they had repair people come in and they could not figure out why, because everything seemed to be right with the mechanics of it. One of the things that they couldn't determine, but they learned. So in 1978, in the vicinity, they found 2 tombstones that were of the founder of the town of Watertown, Alexander Brown, and his wife, Morin. And if you've ever been in that original location, I thought I had a picture of it. I guess I didn't share it here in the slide, but there was they're hanging right beside the elevator doors. And I remember actually when I was there with Barnaby to do an event, I remember getting a picture with the staff in front of the tombstones. And one of the things is the tombstone Marin's name is written improperly. So there's the thought that maybe she's just really, really upset with that. That's one of the explanations for why the elevators were so strange. All I remember is this was a really awesome event. This is when I took this picture. It was in the fall. It was probably 2015, maybe. And I was there to do an evening event. So the library had actually shut down to the public, except for people who showed up for an event where I was going to share some ghost stories. So up on the 2nd floor, we were in what was the kids area, and I was sharing ghost stories. And so they locked the door because all of the staff wanted to come up and see that. So all the people who wanted to come in were inside the building, waited for a few minutes to make sure people got in, went upstairs, and we're all upstairs. And I'm telling some ghost stories. I think Tomes of Terror had come out, so I was talking about the Waterdown Ghost. And it was funny because the staff that were there were nodding their heads saying, yes, the elevator still does that. And while we were all up in the corner, and I was talking, we heard the elevator door ding all on its own. There was no one there and nobody else in the building except all of us that were there. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit because we were just talking about it. And then lo and behold, we got to actually see the elevator do its thing completely on its own. I'm going to move over to the next slide, please, and share my favorite Hamilton haunt. So when I was doing the research for Haunted Hamilton, I learned about the Winking Judge on Augusta Street in Hamilton. And I had never been there, but I found out that they had 25 craft beers on tap. And so I thought this is a fun place to be. Ironically, because I worked in Toronto and I lived in Hamilton, working on books and things like that, I had never actually gone to the location. I had gotten articles from the library, from the newspaper, and done research and read reports from other investigators who had interviewed Mary, who's the owner of the establishment. And so I didn't actually get to the bar until after the book was published, but I met with a couple of my friends and we went to the bar and I gave the owner a copy of Haunted Hamilton, and then we enjoyed quite a few pints of beer at this beautiful old historic pub. And ironically, it became, I ended up living in the building right behind it, one of the big tall apartment buildings behind it. So that actually was my local Cheers, or my local favorite haunt for years. And when I return to Hamilton, as I do regularly, when it's open, I usually pop in to say hi to the regulars who are always still there, as well as to Mary. But some of the stories that come from this, and you can see in the picture, the top right, that's Barnaby, the skeleton. That is not a ghost in the window. I was doing a live reading to Facebook, to my author page, telling some of the ghost stories, and I think it was on Friday the 13th. And so one of the ghost stories is the cat. There's a ghost cat there, and the regulars, if you get them in the right mood, will tell you the story of how sometimes you would be sitting, chatting, and you could feel something brushing your leg, just like a cat that wants some attention. We have two of them, and when they want attention, they want attention. And so you would reach down to feel the cat and pet it, and there was nothing there. Like a second ago, you felt it brushing against your leg, and there's nothing there. And so many different people have felt the cat when they're not paying attention, when they're in the middle of conversations, the cat will come just like a real cat, right? Because they never want attention when you want to give them attention. As a writer myself, I know Meredith only wants attention when I'm in the throes of writing something, and she'll walk across my keyboard to let me know it's time for me to pet her. So that's why I suggest that it's probably a real ghost cat, because it acts just like a real one. But the most famous ghost at Augusta's Winking Judge is the ghost known as the Judge. That's his nickname. And there's a shadowy image of a man in a top hat, kind of like a Lincoln hat. And he's often seen in the bar. He will sometimes be seen out of the corner of your eye, most often on the second floor, which is where that photo was taken. I ghosted, that was for a video I did, and that was as I was talking about the man. I posted a picture of him there. He's often been seen. Sometimes people will look over and see him sitting on the window seats in the front window, like there's a bay window at the front. Sometimes they'll just see an impression as if somebody is sitting in the seat when there's nobody there. But the eeriest story was Mary was talking about her daughter, because she's owned the bar for a long, long time. And she would often be going there in the middle of the day. That it doesn't open until 3 o'clock, so sometimes she would go and clean things up and get things ready from noon till 3 before the doors would open. Bring her daughter with her, and her daughter would just be playing in the bar area while her mother was getting things ready. And she remembers hearing her daughter upstairs on the second floor having a very animated conversation. And she went up to her daughter and said, "What are you? Who are you talking to?" And she says, "Oh, I'm talking to the really nice man in the top hat." Which kind of freaked Mary out, because she had never told her daughter these stories, but suddenly her daughter had seen the man in the top hat. The next slide, please. Dundurn Castle, the location that Dundurn Publishing was named after. This is, as you probably know, it's a National Historic Site. It was built by Alan McNabb, and the location, when you actually picture when people were first coming into Hamilton, coming around the bay, it was this gorgeous stately mansion that was basically meant to show off opulence. Now, some of the pictures you see here, there's a woman in black, the beheaded woman in black. That is from an event I attended that Haunted Hamilton ran, which was last fall. And it was the first time in 20 years that they ever actually allowed ghost tours, because even when I was researching for Haunted Hamilton, the folks at Dundurn Castle don't like to talk about the ghosts. And I wanted to do my book launch there because I wrote about it, and they didn't want to have anything to do with ghosts. So this event last fall was one of the first times ever that they had actually ever allowed like a haunted historic walk. And so there's some of the pictures of the cellars and things like that. Now, some of the stories from Dundurn Castle include it was a 1999 photo, and this was an article that was published in the Hamilton Spectator. Paul Wilson actually wrote it, and it was in one of his columns. And there's a picture because it's a beautiful building, and so a lot of people, if you've been on the grounds, it's a great place to go for a picnic. It's just gorgeous. A lot of people will go there to have their wedding photos done, like inside or just outside on the grounds. And there's some people, the wedding parties, standing in front of one of the windows. And when they got the photo back, there's this face of a woman looking out longingly at the wedding party from a room where there had been nobody inside at the time. It was believed that this was Sophia, who was McNabb's daughter. And there was originally stories that Sophia had died, was one of the daughters who died young and had always wanted to get married, never had a chance. But one of the other stories was that no, Sophia actually got married in that castle and then moved overseas and lived happily ever after. And she passed away in England. But she allegedly returned to the site where she was happiest, where she got married, and is often seen when there is love and happiness and weddings in the air. It's like she wants to go back to that happiness and those past moments. So it was a little bit of a touching story. But again, I found that fascinating article from that 1999 Hamilton Spectator. The other thing that's kind of eerie about Dundurn Castle is McNabb had a penchant for playing the bagpipes. And there were legends. So you take a look at the picture of Dundurn Castle at night that was taken. Can you imagine walking along the grounds or just walking along the street, that is near McNabb, and hearing the eerie sound of bagpipes after midnight as McNabb is on the roof of the building, walking around playing the bagpipes? Like, that alone is just kind of an eerie essence. So it's not a ghost story, but it's something that would probably frighten me. Can I go to the next slide, please? The Hamilton Armories. And this was a building that they began building in 1906. And it's since been named for John W. Foote, who was a soldier, and it's named in his honor. And it was basically because Hamilton had never actually had a home, so it was a massive project and a really important project. And again, beautiful building that's still functioning to this day. But this location is haunted by not just some of the ghosts that you hear from here, such as you can hear drill sergeants barking orders in the middle of the night, echoing through the courtyard in the back. But it actually has some animal ghosts. So the most popular one is Victor the regimental cat. And there was a mummified cat that was found when they had lifted up some floors to do some renovations not that long ago, not that many decades ago. And the cat is actually still on display. The mummified cat is still on display there. And oftentimes Victor could be seen wandering around, seen at night, seen in the middle of the day. Sometimes people just see fleeting glimpses of this cat. Again, another cat ghost. But the other ghosts are the ghosts of the horses from the stalls. Sometimes the echoes of the horses, of their hooves clicking across the courtyard in the middle of the night can be heard as well. But still a fascinating place just on James Street. That would be north or south? I think it's north. You'll correct me if I'm wrong on that one. If you move to the next one. The next ghost story I'm going to share with you is the Tombstone Ghost. And again, This I found from the files in the archives at the library, and it was from an old Hamilton Spectator article. Now, those are just recreation photos that I found to use to kind of help illustrate it, because I couldn't find the original illustration from the Spectator article. That still gives me nightmares to this day, but it looks like a little bit of a cross between the blue ghost on the left and the ghost hovering above the boy in the bed on that other picture. So the story goes back to 1971, where Norm Bellotti and his wife were in a building, and it was somewhere on Hamilton Mountain, and it was like a 4-story apartment building, and Norm woke up to the sound of his wife screaming in absolute terror, and he sat up, bolt upright, and said, "What is wrong?" And she said, "Oh my God, I saw the most horrific thing. I was laying in bed, I was on my back, I opened my eyes, and floating above me, not more than 6 or 8 inches above me, was this woman with this, she almost had almost no face, these dark socket for eyes and a big blank mouth, like a dark for mouth. And it was just the upper torso of her body. She was floating above me. She looked like she was in anguish, and I couldn't see. She had no lower body at all. She just disappeared. I screamed. I didn't know what to do. The woman showed up again a few weeks later. This time she was hovering above the bed. When she woke up, she saw her going to a particular wall. So after this ghost had appeared a number of times, they ended up getting some investigators in because they were a little bit freaked out and didn't know what to do. They ended up bringing in one of the people they brought in. Apart from a rabbi, apart from a priest, they brought in a medium who came all the way in from an institute in Buffalo. And they had determined, or at least to seem to find a feeling or an essence, that this was a woman who had died in a really horribly painful way, and that there was some unresolved issues, and they couldn't figure out why she was going to this one particular wall repeatedly. Although there was an indication that they believed the woman had been in a wheelchair in the last moments of her life, or the last little while from her life, which may have explained why the ghost, you never saw legs on the ghost. It was just the upper body of that woman. So that was 1971. In 1982, they ended up moving away, almost forgetting about all of the weird things that had happened there. And then Norm saw an article in the newspaper. In 1982, they were doing construction. They were tearing down that building to probably put up a parking lot or something else there. And they had found in the walls of the building, and it was actually in the wall that was on the side of the house where the ghost was going to, tombstone. And it was a tombstone for a double grave. Our baby, it said on it. And it named 2 different young children who had died. And the psychics came back and said, when they looked into it, that they felt that this woman was trying to let people know the tombstones were in the wall so that their spirits and her spirit could finally go to rest, so they could actually move them away. And they must have, construction sites will often throw all kinds of stuff. If you've ever been on a construction site, I mean, I could tell you in Hamilton for sure, 2 of the houses I lived in that were new builds, they had probably dozens and dozens of cigarettes and Tim Hortons cups that were built into the cement underneath my floor. Who knows what other things get tossed into those holes before they fill it up with cement. So that was just kind of an interesting story. The thing about this story that freaked me out the most was I used to I would work full time, and I would come home and I would write. So often I would write till 2 or 3 in the morning. I remember being in the basement in my house in Hamilton, and the only lights I had on were in my office in the basement, and my wife and son were upstairs, both asleep. It was 2 in the morning. I just finished writing the Tombstone Ghost chapter, and there's the Hamilton, a photocopy of the Hamilton Spectator article with the creepy artist rendition of the ghost who appeared above her. And I was so scared, I couldn't leave the den, my office, to go upstairs, walk through the dark, because the way the lights were, I would have had to turn off the light in my den, and then I would have had to walk at least 5 feet before I got to the next light switch to turn on the next light, because all the other lights in the house were dark. And I was terrified. I couldn't go into the dark. So I actually sat there in my chair and I thought, maybe I could fall asleep here. Maybe I'll just sleep in the office with all the lights on. Maybe I'll be okay. I think it was about 40 minutes later, I finally worked up the nerve and the courage to get there. But that's the effect that writing these kinds of stories can sometimes have on me. If you can move to the next slide, please. I'm going to share a story of, because people often ask if sometimes the stories are a little bit too good to be true. And I like to write with I believe in things that we don't know, but I'm also skeptical. So I always try to find explanations. And one of the ones that was interesting was Bellevue Mansion, also known as Murder Mansion. It was 1848, was built by John Bradley. He was the original owner. And this is a beautiful mansion that is on, I can't see the slide there, but it's on, is it Belvedere Street or up on Hamilton Mountain? And I remember because my wife, who grew up in Hamilton, used to talk about this. Everyone said this was a haunted building. It was always haunted. They would always go across the street. They wouldn't walk in front of the house because by the time she was a child, it had been abandoned and hadn't been lived in. There was a story that goes with Bellevue Mansion, and the story was that there was a man who lived there with his family. And he went in the middle of the night, grabbed an axe from the shed. He butchered his family. He killed his child and his wife. And then he went up onto the widow's walk on the 3rd floor and he hung himself. As the story goes, the next family that moved into that house, the 17-year-old teenage son, found the same axe in the middle of the night, murdered his family, and hung himself in the widow's walk. Now, that's a really creepy, freaky story. But one of the things I tend to be a little bit skeptical about, because there are ghost stories from this location, which I'm going to share with you before I talk about the research I did on this. The ghost of a man with light brown hair is often seen walking on the ground, usually approaching people with hostility as if, get off my property. The other ghost that was often seen from the 2nd story windows was a woman with blazing red hair, looking like she was screaming. You couldn't hear the screams. You could just see as if she was screaming, rushing back and forth as if she was running from someone on the 2nd floor. So those are kind of some creepy images. So when I do research for a book like this, I think, wait a second, I don't know much, but I do know that if an axe had been used in the act of a murder, they wouldn't put it back in the shed. It would probably be in police custody in some sort of evidence locker somewhere, wouldn't it? I also reached out to the police because after hearing the stories, I said, oh, this is interesting. Let me find out when it happened, because I wanted to write about when did this first murder happen and when did the second murder happen. There had been no axe murders anywhere in Hamilton for the decades that I looked at, not to mention 2 in the same mansion using an axe. I also found it interesting that these stories seem to have been generated around the same time that the original movie for Stephen King's The Shining came out, with Jack Nicholson was chasing his family around the old hotel in the Colorado mountains with an axe. And I even found in some of my writing of some of my other books like Spooky Sudbury that oftentimes the weird UFO phenomenon was very, very similar. And it came out around the same time that Close Encounters, the movie Close Encounters came out. So there's a lot of stuff with popular culture that really infuses with the legends. So in the writing of this chapter, I spent 2.5 pages outlining all the research I did and said, you know what? It's a really cool story, but this is not true. This is a complete fallacy, but still, doesn't it make a really creepy tale? And my editor got really mad at me and said, you can't do that. You have true believers that are reading this. You can't suddenly do that to them. And I said, yeah, but I can't, with integrity, I can't share the story. It's still a cool story because Bellevue Mansion, which was torn down in 2000, was a beautiful historic building. And it's so sad that it's gone, because right now it's just this sad, haunted, empty lot that actually still gives me the creeps, even though I don't think those weird murders actually happened there. What I ended up doing is I cut that down. So rather than outline all the details I found in the research, I cut it down to just I couldn't find any evidence that these murders had actually happened in Hamilton, but still, isn't that a cool story? So that's how I satisfied my journalistic integrity for that particular story. The next story I'm going to share is related to the next slide, please. was something I didn't write about until Haunted Hospitals. And I was actually doing a talk on Haunted Hamilton at one of the libraries up on the mountain in Hamilton. And I had a gentleman stick around, and he said he waited till everyone was gone, and then he shared a story with me that ended up getting into the Haunted Hospitals book many, many years later. I lived in the neighborhood across from this hospital for years. You couldn't actually see it from the road because there were other hospital buildings in front of it. But ever since the new St. Joseph Healthcare Center that was built there, ever since they tore down some of the older buildings, as you drive by on West 5th, you can actually see it from the road, which is kind of interesting that I'd lived there for so many years and had never noticed it till way after I moved out of that neighborhood. But he had been working at Stelco during the day and working as a security guard at night. And this building was attached to the other buildings through some underground tunnels. And so this was closed down and boarded up. And he would just be patrolling, because oftentimes people want to break into abandoned buildings to drink or do mischievous things and maybe sometimes destroy property. And he was walking around, and he was in Century Manor, and he could hear voices at the end of the hall. And it was probably 1 a.m. when he did this, and he thought, aha, I got them. Probably teenagers that broke in. So he sneaks to the end of the hallway. He can still hear the talking. He opens the door. The door opens. He sees 2 women standing there. They look to be wearing like old era nurse uniforms, which kind of freaks him out, because he's like, is Halloween? Like, are they dressed up? What's going on? Though they're talking, they both turn to look at him. The one female ghost turns to her friend and says, "See, I told you he could hear us." At which point he slams the door, stands back, trying to figure out what he saw, takes a deep breath, opens the door again, and there's nobody there. So he's a little bit freaked out, and he's wondering, am I overtired because I'm working double shifts? Because that can happen. He continues to move on. Later on, he's coming through a tunnel, leaving Century Manor, walking towards one of the buildings that's not there anymore. And he feels this pressure, almost like a wind tunnel pressure, pushing him physically, trying to force him out. And it was really, really freaky. It just felt like this powerful wind tunnel effect. And he had no idea where it was coming from, but it was just wanting to push him out. At that point, he had said, enough is enough. I don't make enough money. He took off. He left that campus, and he ended up going to a payphone. And this is back in the time, way before cell phones. And he ended up calling his boss saying, I quit. I'm not coming back to this. This is too freaky. And then, of course, he shared that story with me. The one thing I should, if you can go to the next slide, please, I failed to mention is Century Manor was quite a giant sprawling estate on the Hamilton Mountain that employed hundreds of people, had its own, they grew their own food. It was almost like its own mini city in terms of just how prosperous and important it was. It was one of the premier psychiatric hospitals in the in the province of Ontario for the longest time. And it's kind of sad. One of the things I learned when I do these books is it's so sad just how powerful and how important these historic pieces of property were, and how they employed people and the livelihoods of so many. And it's so sad that it's sitting vacant now. This is one of the live videos I had done from Century Manor, obviously sharing some of the stories. They were talking about turning it into a residence for Mohawk College, which is just across the street, which could be interesting. I haven't seen how the development's going for that, but there was still speculation about that. And I would be curious to know, once people move back into that building, if more stories will come out of that building. Now, I'm just about to wrap up the sort of the me talking all the time part of this. If we want to move to the next slide, this is next slide should be this is just sort of a postcard. I dropped a ton of these off at the Winking Judge and a few other locations downtown. So it's actually a postcard, so you can mail it. I should, when the library's open again, I should make sure I give some to the library for people who want them. But it's so people can go on a self-guided walking tour of some of the downtown locations that are talked about in the book as well, which is kind of fun because it's a great way to see the city. Also, going with the ghost walks or Haunted Hamilton would be a great guide. The other thing, if you're curious to do this on your own, next slide please, and socially distant or physically distant, is through an app, a free app you can get on your iPhone or on your Android. It's called Voice Map. If you open up the app, I have written a half-hour tour. It's a 2-kilometer walk that starts in front of the James Street Armories, and it kind of walks you through past the Tivoli. I tell you some stories, talk about the Torso murders. I share a few other stories of the Royal Connaught, and obviously it ends at the Winking Judge because I'm kind of partial to that, and I really love that place because that's where I ended my little mini tour when I was coming up with it. But it's a really, really fun way for you to get some of that experience, even if you can't go on a ghost walk just yet. So that's kind of it. If you want to go to the next slide, this is just time for the Q&A. I hope I didn't go over my allotted time, but I'm hoping that that gave you some insights into the wonderful city that we know and love. And I often said, just to let you know, when the book first came out, I remember describing it as a love letter to my city, and that's often what Haunted Hamilton felt to me, was that I fell in love with the city of Hamilton as I was researching this book because of all of the things I learned about the history that I hadn't known, and I had been an implant into Hamilton from Sudbury, but Hamilton still feels home to me. That is where my son was born. So Hamilton will always be critical and always be important to me, and I'll always have a passion for Hamilton. It's also a place where I encountered a bookstore that I ended up writing a Twilight Zone short story about because I got lost in the bookstore on my very first trip to Hamilton, and I thought I was never going to get out. I thought it was like a Venus flytrap for book nerds, which kind of I eventually did get out. Obviously, I'm safe today, but I ended up writing a short story about it because I was so inspired. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to entertain those.
Sure, we're just going to get Marcel on the mic here, and he'll be asking the questions.
Great, thanks, Alex.
So thank you very much, Mark. And now you've made it so that even when the shutdown ends, I still don't want to leave the house. Okay, the only question I'm seeing so far is, can't remember the name of the film, but it involved a severed hand being used as a candle holder. And I swear I'm not making that up.
Oh, is that a film that scared somebody?
I believe so.
Oh, gee, does anyone else recognize that one?
Possibly the
I usually ask a librarian when I don't know something like that.
Possibly the original Wicker Man.
Wicker Man, is that what it was? Possibly. Okay.
Possibly.
Okay.
So I've got a question for you, actually.
Sure.
Now, I just also want to relate this first, as I don't know if you remember this. A few years ago, you did a writing workshop, a horror writing workshop for teens here at the library.
I remember it well. I
went
think
very
you
well.
and I were there together.
I also remember that the kids were still talking about it a week later. And I also remember that you and I both had hair, and now neither of us do. Coincidence?
No, I think not. I think not. Now, I use just for men hair dye in my beard too. So otherwise we would be twins almost.
Scary thought for you, sir. A question that I have, though, that is actually related to that session was the psychology of horror. Why do we want to go and be scared? Because the logical thing is that we should avoid horror. Right. Yet I've heard horror fans complain about this book or this movie not being scary enough. So what do you have to say about the psychology of that?
Yeah, that is a great question, because I often wonder at myself, why do I, as being such a big chicken, why am I drawn to this? Why am I drawn to wanting to share scary stories? And I think part of it, the psychology, is that when we pick up a book or we read an article of some other place, whether it's fictitious or whether it's a real location, we have the safety of being able to close the book. We have the safety of being able to say, and in the case of horror fiction, and in the case of stories that are not true, that are fantasies, it can be terrifying. The stakes can be high. The good guys usually win, unlike reality where there is no guarantee. So we have the safety that it's like a roller coaster. I'm pretty much guaranteed that if I go on the roller coaster, I'm terrified of heights, I'm gonna scream. I may have to change my pants. I may be nauseous, but I will survive. And so what a horror movie or story or television program gives us is it gives us the satisfaction of the adrenaline rush without the fear that we're actually going to die. And that's satisfying. The other thing is when you think about all of the horrific things that are happening in the news on an ongoing basis, not just now, but historically, it allows you an opportunity to escape into a world where you can have some confidence that the good guys are going to come out of it, that good is going to prosper over evil. Or if not, you can at least close the book and go, okay, I'm done with that. So I think there's interesting psychology. The other thing I think we're all fascinated with what if. We all wonder, we speculate, and a lot of it is, what would you do if you won Lotto 649? Everyone has a story. But I think everyone also has, which is why I wanted to prompt people with those questions, is there's probably some childhood fear that still sticks with you. For me, I mean, one of the other things was running up those stairs, so in case something reached between the risers, because you don't just walk upstairs from the dark basement, you run up the stairs. Ask any kid, or me, 51-year-old. You don't just walk up the stairs, you tear up them.
Hey, Marcel, we've got a few more questions in the Q&A.
So I see. Now, the first one I'm seeing is, have you ever considered writing a fictional ghost story?
I have written dozens and dozens of them. So one of the ones I wrote was actually about a collector of haunted artifacts who ends up collecting all these haunted artifacts, puts them all in a room. And then what would happen if you had a bunch of teenagers who suddenly had to share the same bedroom? They would probably be fighting. So it kind of drives him a little bit crazy because he's trapped in a house with all of these bickering ghosts. So it's kind of a dark humor story. I've written ghost stories about people who come back on Halloween just because they want a cigarette again, because that's how desperate the addiction is. I've written numerous ghost stories. So I have. You can actually read some of them for free online. Prospero's Ghost, for example, if you look online, actually you can probably get them through the library as well. I've got One Hand Screaming, which is a collection of ghost stories. Nocturnal Streams, Active Reader. Prospero's Ghost is free. You can download that through most online retailers or ask for it at your local library. And Prospero's Ghost is a fictitious story about a ghost who is a Shakespearean scholar. McMaster, now I made him up. Professor Prospero was his nickname, and he comes back to take revenge on people who dare reprint, because I used to run a print-on-demand machine at McMaster University when I was at the bookstore there. And I imagined, as we were scanning these old texts and recreating them, I imagined what would happen if there was like a diehard purist print lover and Shakespearean scholar who was also a crabby guy. What if he came back and sought revenge on anyone who dared desecrate The Tempest, which is Shakespearean, the play, which is where the character Prospero comes from. And I had a lot of fun writing that fictitious ghost. I often will tell, when I'm in person, the story of Prospero's Ghost, which started at Carleton University when I worked there at the theater. I made up a ghost who had died in the construction. He then moved to every bookstore I ever worked at, including the chapters in Ancaster, where at Halloween I would gather the staff around and tell them the story about the construction worker who died in the building of the building, who was seen walking around with a copy of The Tempest. And then when I moved to McMaster, I turned it into a guard who had died on campus in the bookstore, and it scared the staff with that story. So Prospero's followed me around and has haunted me for many, many years.
That's pretty cool, Mark. Now I have another question here about Battlefield House and the grounds in Stony Creek. Question is, if it's haunted. I always had strange feelings around there as a child.
Oh yeah, actually yes. I didn't talk about it, but there is a chapter on Battlefield House in Haunted Hamilton, which you can get at the Hamilton Public Library. But yeah, the battlefield itself, there's stories of people seeing apparitions of soldiers, sometimes walking through the foggy field. The house itself is haunted by a woman ghost. And there's been often, I'm trying to remember the details because it's been a long time since I researched and wrote them. But there was a female ghost I remember, in that museum, in that building that was seen. And I think it had something to do with that. That was one of the ghosts that continued to relocate things. There would be objects that would be missing, and you couldn't find your keys, or you couldn't find this object, and then 2 weeks later you would find it exactly where you thought you put it, and you looked like 6 or 7 times. So yeah, that was definitely one of the locations.
Do you have any stories to share about the Hamilton Cemetery?
I do. This is the one up on the. Are you talking about the one across from Dundurn, or?
I'm not sure actually. I'm just
Okay.
just reading the question that's here, but I know that is a very, very old and very large cemetery.
Yeah, I have some stories from Burkholder Cemetery that I can kind of share if you're interested. So Burkholder Cemetery, this was named after Jacob Burkholder, who October 1974, he and his wife were one of the first pioneering families in the Hamilton Mountain area. They established the settlement on Mohawk Trail, and they established a cemetery on a portion of land which was one of the first interments to the Burkholder Cemetery was his son Joseph, who died after falling off of a roof. So in the early 1800s, neighboring people from neighboring communities would bring people, and that's how it kind of became cemetery. One of the things that was fascinated was one of the epitaphs. It was the resting place of Christian Burkholder, who died in 1843, and it reads, "Remember, friend, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Prepare for death and follow me." Which just, it gives me a chill every time I hear that. And I believe I used that quote to open the book up. There was an article of some weird ghostly mists seen in that cemetery that were unexplainable, that I remember from that one. And I think that was the chapter where I talked a little bit about why grave robbing was such a popular activity, because cadavers were expensive, and sometimes medical professionals or medical students, it was an easy way to get a hold of body parts to practice on. And it was a business, of course, digging them up and selling them on the market. So,
got another question here from Trish. It's do you find that most ghosts hang out in historic areas? No new condo developments?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because when you figure the longer a place has been around, chances are there's ghosts. But it also depends on what you believe a ghost is. Is the ghost of a spirit of someone from a long time ago? Chances are an older building is going to have more likeliness because of more residents over time. One of the theories of ghosts that I often entertain is that perhaps a ghost is the spirit of the departed that has not been able to leave this plane and move on to another realm of existence. But perhaps a ghost is really an echo or ripple in space and time of some traumatic event or incident that happened. And what you're seeing is it's like a ripple in a pool. You're seeing the ripples of some trauma that happened there. And I even wrote a short story inspired by one of my theories, is that perhaps you can leave your spirit behind while you're still alive. And what if your spirit is so tied to a place that you can be thousands of miles away, but people are continuing to see you there because you're so tied, you're so connected to that place, which I think can happen. So could that happen in a condo that was just recently open? The other thing I would ask you is a new condo, well, it's on some sort of property and it's on some sort of ground, and people lived here for hundreds of years and maybe thousands of years before now. So who knows what could be there? The one thing I will say is that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophies, as Hamlet told Horatio in the play of that same name.
Got another question from Trish here. When not researching or writing ghost stories, what type of books do you read?
A great question, Tricia. Actually, I read everything. So right now, for example, I'm reading a book called Anthem, which was a book of Martin Popoff, who's a Toronto-based writer, and it's a history of Rush, my favorite band, the Canadian rock trio. So I'm reading that right now. I'm reading a new science fiction novel from Robert J. Sawyer about Oppenheimer, who was one of the scientists who worked on the atomic bomb. I am reading a collection of short stories, sort of literary short stories from a friend of mine from Texas called Amy Teagan, and that's called Poison. I am reading a book called Audio for Authors by Joanna Penn. I have multiple books on the go. Joanna Penn, this is on making audiobooks for authors. I'm reading Stephen King's, I'm listening to this one, Stephen King's If It Bleeds, and that comes from the old journalistic line, if it bleeds, it leads. So the stories that have violence go on the front page. And I am just starting, I just got the audiobook for White Fragility, so I'm going back and forth between nonfiction and fiction. And let's see, what else do I have on my Kobo? Oh, a science fiction novel from Scott Overton. About a guy who gets to shrink down and go into someone's bloodstream to prevent an assassination. Kind of like that old classic science fiction movie. What was that called? I can't even remember.
The Sound of Music.
The Sound of Music. Yeah. So I do. I read lots of things, and of course I'm reading a couple nonfiction books on haunted places because I'm doing research for. I'm doing research for some other books like The Haunted Dolls and Haunted Bars and Breweries.
So I have another question here from Lily. Which location have you visited, and which that unnerved you the most?
I visited most of the locations from Hamilton. I think so. One of the things that actually unnerved me the most, even though I later found that I couldn't support the murders that happened at Bellevue Mansion, was I remember I was going for a jog up in the Hamilton Mountain, and I stopped where the Bellevue Mansion used to be. And I remember it was like an overcast, August day. And I remember just walking onto the ground where the building stood, thinking about the woman who was seen in the window and the guy who would come approaching. I was waiting for some apparition to show up and approach me. And I pulled out my phone and I because I was listening to music at the time, stopped the music and I just recorded and I recorded myself and the impressions I had. And I remember in the middle of the afternoon, I remember being so scared because I just had this weird, eerie feeling that there was something there that I couldn't see. And I remember looking out down to, anywhere from the escarpment, when you look down onto the city, it's such a beautiful scene, but I just remember feeling really, really disturbed. I'm still a little bit freaked out that nothing had, considering the value of property, that nobody has put anything up on that location. So that kind of freaks me out a little bit. Like, why is there nothing there? Is that the owners are just not doing anything with it, or is there a reason why? So that kind of freaked me out a little bit. I used to get freaked out when I worked at McMaster University, when I worked on campus, and I was working really, really late during was called the September Rush, when I would be, the bookstore would close at 9 o'clock, but sometimes I would be there unpacking boxes of textbooks for the next day, and sometimes I'd be there till 1 a.m, either by myself or with just one other staff member. And a lot of my fears of working alone in the dark on an old campus like that, and it's not that old, because Mac turned 75 when I started working there, which was 2006, 2005. So it's not, it's 100 years old. And again, it originates in Toronto, so it's not even 100 years old on its current location. But that used to freak me out.
Got a very practical question here. Where can we purchase your books in Hamilton?
I would ask for that at Epic Books. I would ask for it at JB Gordon downtown. I would ask for it at I can't remember, did Brian Prince is a new bookstore there. Or you can order it online. I prefer supporting local independent bookstores where possible. I'm sure you can get it at the Indigo in Ancaster. If they don't have it in stock, they can probably get it for you. You can order it online. And I do encourage you to check out any of my books at the Hamilton Public Library, because I do have books available in print, obviously, in ebook as well. And many of my books are also available in audio as well. So you can get those through the library, or you can get those at, Kobo and Amazon, Google, Apple, all of the places. Thank you for asking. You can also get a number of them for free. So you can read, for example, you can read Prospero's Ghost for free. You can read, which appears in the anthology Campus Chills, which is only fiction. It's not true ghost stories. You can read Nocturnal Screams and Night Cries. The first one in that series is free, because I always like giving people a sample to make sure they're going to like it before they buy anything.
Good to know. So actually, I don't have any more questions, although somebody did want to point out that the science fiction movie you were referring to earlier was Fantastic Voyage.
Fantastic Voyage. Yeah, that's where they shrunk a submarine down and they went into the bloodstream. Right?
and thank you, Trish, again.
Thank you, Trish. Trish is well read too, I betcha.
So do we have any other questions?
It looks like that's it, Marcel.
Do we have any character references who want to appear before we pass sentence? Well, I guess that's it. It looks to me like we're done for the evening. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And thank you, Mark. That was absolutely great.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to do this with you guys.
So stay healthy, stay safe. And the best way to stay safe, even when there isn't a pandemic, is to just not leave the house, which I think I'm going to seriously investigate from here on in.